Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Anonymous. And here's her story. Hi, Ollie. Here's some more context to my life to build on the last video. Your illness is you refusing to face the narcissist. I struggle with knowing what to include and what not to include. Also, I think some of my trauma may tempt me not to go too deep on certain issues, but I will do my best. I believe it was mentioned on the last video that I might be on medication. I'm not on medication. I have very low contact with my mom. I haven't talked to her in 10 months. The reason I don't cut her off completely is I have one sister-in-law who I feel is fairly healthy and is one of the only people I trust in the world, and I feel if I completely go no contact with my mom, I will lose that relationship. And my nieces and nephews I love dearly because my mom will go crazy with no contact and make my sister-in-law's life crazy trying to get to me through her. That's not your problem. If she's going to make your sister-in-law's life crazy, if you're staying there so your sister-in-law's life isn't crazy, that's the wrong reason to stay there. I have very little people in my life, and I massively struggle with building relationships because I spent most of my life, until a few years ago, massively codependent with my mom, and I feel I have a lot of trauma around relationships, intimacy due to that. So keeping anyone I can trust is important to me to keep moving on. I am in therapy and feel that I have made significant progress, although the progress is slow going. As I mentioned in my last video, my mother is NPD. I am sure of that. My father and my brother, I am not sure of, and I am curious for any input from anyone on what they might be. Okay, I don't know where to start, so I will start from the beginning. I was born into my family of my parents and two much older brothers in a small isolated town where I grew up. As I mentioned in previous video, my parents are both very academic and very religious. They are not Mormon. They are evangelical Christian. My mom always talks about how I was God's special gift to her and that she was told by the doctor that I was a boy and she wanted a girl so bad. And when I was born, she found out I was a girl. It was a big deal to her. My family always talked about how cute I was, and I think my mom got a lot of supply off me when I was young due to my cuteness. I remember actually feeling really happy and free at a young age, under age 5, although I think I had no normal mother-child bonding with my mom. After that, I feel like everything changed, and I've never felt the happiness I felt that at that age since then. My parents always say how spoiled I was and this kind of thing, and I was basically felt like my parents would always say how spoiled I was and this kind of thing, and I basically felt like I became Cinderella. My parents never physically abused or swore or called obvious names. Again, because they were religious, swearing was horrifying to them. Yet my mother never loved me. She never validated any sense of self or individuality I had. If I didn't fall into line with what she wanted me to do, she would basically have an emotional meltdown and scream and cry and go on and on. If I didn't give in, sometimes it could last for up to 6 hours. Well, that's severe. That comes from that severe religious training. You know, they just keep going and hammering you until you submit. I couldn't get away. She would follow me into my room or wherever I would go, and then my dad would come in and say, "Listen to your mother, and if you don't, you have to deal with me." I was always terrified of her because she could turn on me at any second. A lot of times over things that had nothing to do with me. Like maybe she just woke up in a bad mood, and it would happen daily. It would And just when I would feel like I would be on the verge of a mental breakdown from her, she would come and comfort me, basically smother and tell me everything would be okay if I would do as she would say. Like I said, my parents would use God. They would make me write verses repeatedly about obeying your parents and verses about going to hell. And like I say about religious people like this, they're atheists. They're atheists. I can make everything if you listen to me, not to God. Listen to me because I am God. My mom would tell me graphic stories about hell and how all my friends at school were going to hell. My dad would never stick around for these big dramas, but he would always show up later after my mom would tell him what a horrible child I was, and then he would say, "Listen to your mom." And if I pushed him, he would get this look of uncontrolled rage in his eyes that always scared me. It seems weird because they never physically abused me, yet I was terrified of them. Because they were mentally abusing you with their religion bullshit. My mom would do all sorts of weird shit, like dress me badly on purpose. Like really inappropriate mismatched adult clothes on a child. One time she bought all three of us kids a soother and wanted us to use it as a joke, but she seemed to get some gratification out of it. My brothers were teenagers at this point. She would constantly try to get me to do things that were inappropriate. She dressed me so badly, like a clown. She used to make me sleep in her bed and cuddle with her regularly, even getting into teenage age, and I hated it because I already hated her and had no loving feelings towards her. Those died long ago when she tried to break my spirit as a little girl. But yet I was stuck in this controlled dynamic. I had to just do everything, otherwise risk her hours-long freakouts. She would barge into my room in the middle of the night and wake me up, flip out over some really random stuff. She would take my possessions, get rid of it, or break it. And when I would get mad, she would flip out on me. It sounds like my mother. It's just straight bullying. That's all it is. It's terrorism tactics. It's how you break somebody. She's breaking you. And that's what these religious narcissists do. It's a slow breakdown. Okay? If you saw anything like SEAL Team 6 or when they caught Osama bin Laden, how they break these terrorists down. It's interrogation, sleep deprivation. If you just give me what I want, I'll make it all go away. If she saw me feeling good or enjoying myself, it would enrage her. All the stuff you see on Narcissist YouTube was her. She made me have naked baths with her when I was like age 11 or 12, well into puberty. I remember this one specific time I told her and my dad, no, I don't want to do it. And my dad got all authoritarian on me and told me, yes, why don't you bathe with your mother? I still have flashbacks of the baths. I had no other people to go to because my parents wouldn't let me have friends outside of their religious sphere. And there were very few religious people my age. The religious culture was one they could control easily. They were one of the people who founded the church we went to. We also weren't allowed much in the way of movies or anything because it was sinful. But the weird part is my mom would constantly watch like a 7-year-old's cartoon on her own over and over, like cartoons she's already seen. And my dad would watch them too with her as if it was normal. She would force me to watch them. I can't even watch cartoons now. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. She also never worked a day in her life and never go out in public except for church. My dad would do everything. Work, get the mail, take the garbage cans out, put the gas in the car. I had never seen her once in my entire life put gas in a car. Gaslighting was a regular thing. I could never seem to step out of it. Maybe that's why my stories kind of seem kind of vague, because I still struggle with all the gaslighting. My mom would do something, I would say, "Mom, you just did blah, blah, blah." "No, I didn't." And I would say, "You're lying." And then off would start the huge drama. My dad would say, "Don't you ever accuse your mother of lying. That is a huge deal. Lying is very sinful in God's eyes." I just felt empty all the time and was constantly putting on a fake persona because I couldn't be myself. I am still discovering who my real self is now in my 30s. She would always retell family stories if company was over and the stories were completely changed from how they actually happened. Sometimes she would full on make up a story 100% fabricated about me if she thought she could get supply from the people listening. And I was expected to just go along and corroborate this completely false story about me, and I would cause, "What else can I do?" My mom would flip out in front of the company, which would totally be narcissistic injury, which meant 100 times more flipping out once the company was gone. It's hard to explain it all. Sometimes it's the little things, like how I never had a real birthday party, or how all my clothes were from the secondhand store, bought on purpose to make me look ugly. One birthday, my gift was a discount pair of plastic flip-flops from Zellers, a cheap discount store, and how I had no money to spend on me, though they would go on and on about how 10% of their total income went towards the church. I guess I mattered less than the church. Of course. But they founded the church, didn't they? How I never got to do anything at my friend's school how I never got to do anything my friends at school would do, and if I brought it up to my parents, they would come up with some kind of theory on the spot of why what my friends was doing was garbage, and my parents' way of living was the only way. Example, friends would go to Disneyland. Disneyland was decadent garbage. My friends would have a new type of food or would have sushi for dinner. How shallow those people were trying to seem cool eating sushi. Sounds ridiculous, but this is the type of stuff my parents would say. When my parents it was "You're an asshole. If you do that, you're an asshole. Anybody who does that is an asshole. Anybody who goes to Disneyland is an asshole. Anybody who goes out for dinner is an asshole." And that's what it is. Your parents are just using religion. How I would go to school with giant nests of tangles in my hair because my mom wouldn't brush my hair. How I would look after myself and get myself up in the morning beginning in kindergarten. How the kids at school thought I was poor and would bully me because I had a plain slice of bread for a snack, because I was 6 years old getting myself up in the morning and finding my own food in the house and didn't know how to make myself food. We had no snack-like food. That is too decadent. How would I eat food off the ground because I was hungry and had intense food cravings? How church just felt like more of the same. You are worthless because you sin, and even as a baby you were born sinful. Except now it's the pastor and God saying so instead of my parents. So as you can see, they never actually said you don't matter. They showed it with their actions. But other things too, like how I lived in constant fear of my mother exploding, how my mother would go on and on about her childhood, and how I was always thought somehow if I just did enough or tried hard enough, I could fix her and get the love I needed. I still struggle to this day with trying to fix people's problems. And you're keeping this woman in your life? This woman's a monster. Okay, and anybody who would associate with her is a monster as well. I don't care what you say about, your sister-in-law or whoever it is. I don't care what you say. Anybody who associates with this psychosis, with this toxicity, will destroy you. In childhood, I also had these people such as friends that would latch on to, usually codependently, and I feel honestly those random people did more to help raise me than my mother, even though some of them were my age. I had one best friend for 10 years that I felt very codependent with. When I hit teenage years, one of my best friends that I was just talking about moved away, and it was almost as if my parents became harder on me and religious with me as a teenager. I was basically not allowed to have any friends. No dating, of course. They followed the ideas around Christian purity culture, if you know anything about that. It's basically, if you're a female, your role is to be a virgin, and your dad encourages and helps protect your virginity. Barf. And your only role in life is to get married to a Christian man and make religious babies. It's a cult. It's just another cult. It's another cult. My dad would take me out in the woods and make me read Bible verses and talk about how God wanted me to be a virgin, etc. I get feelings of nausea thinking about this. But on top of that, my parents just acted like sex was like a taboo and disturbing subject, so I became very sexually repressed. Anyways, I spent most of my teen years feeling trapped and suffocated, depressed and angry, and I was extremely depressed that my one friend had left, and I basically had no one besides my mom to be codependent with, and I loathed her. I had no sense of self at this point to be my own person and not function non-codependently. We lived in a small, isolated town, so I felt isolated and trapped on many levels. I would think about suicide a lot, but the thing that got me through was thinking that I could leave them and that town once I turned 18. I wanted to desperately leave, but their influence was on me still very strong, and it was like I didn't have enough sense on my own self. I did not have a sense of my own self, not to mention I had no idea what narcissism was or anything. So I didn't understand what was going on. To do what I wanted, and I ended up spending 2 years in Bible college after graduating high school, which in the deepest part of myself I knew was fraudulent. I knew I just felt empty inside with religion, and it didn't feel right. I did manage to do some traveling during this time on my own money, did some backpacking in Asia and Europe, and I feel this helped me make a small step towards removing myself from the mind control and brain fog I had because of my family growing up. I really feel like it was a cult-like brainwashing environment I was raised in. It was. And understand something, the cult is about them. The narcissist religious cult is about them. It's not about the cult. It's about them. It's about their power over you. And when you keep keeping you, this is sexual abuse. What your father did for you, did to you, even though he didn't touch you. They don't have to touch you. They don't have to penetrate you for them to sexually abuse you. Dragging you out in the woods and constantly as a child talking about sex, and it's sexual abuse. It's ruining your sexuality, whether you do it through molestation or do it through psychologically. They're both sexual. They're both sexual abuse. After this, I had my first long-term relationship with a guy who was religious. I'm not proud of this, but I knew from the beginning that he wasn't someone I was capable of loving, that I would be capable of loving. Yet I dated him for several years. He was a decent person, but almost had this weird dynamic where he wanted to do anything to get me. He would constantly use money to try to buy my love, and honestly, this made me feel attracted to him less. But I feel that I was so desperate for love, I felt like I couldn't let go of him. He was also Chinese, and I felt like part of the reason that he liked me was because he liked that I was white, blonde. I just felt empathy with that relationship too. I then went on to my next long-term relationship, to someone who was very unhealthy. I still to this day have no idea if he had a personality disorder or what, but he definitely had depression and anger issues. He had no job almost the whole time I knew him. No driver's license, no high school diploma. At the time, I was working on a university, not Bible university degree. He was an intelligent person and actually seemed to help me understand myself a lot, and has lots of issues. He was the first person to tell me how fucked up my parents were. This helped me because it gave me the outside validation I never had. He dropped out of high school due to anxiety. He would act like he was interested in going to therapy but wouldn't go. I was very codependent with him, constantly trying to help him fix his problems. I did this for 5 years, but weirdly, this was the first time I didn't feel empty inside. I felt like I was starting to uncover tiny bits of my real self for the very first time. During this time, I had a mental breakdown. I was going to university full time, working several jobs, trying to pay for it, and trying to fix this guy's problem. And my body just shut off. I had to drop out of school in the middle of the semester and moved home because I physically couldn't take care of myself anymore. Moving into my mom's house, of course, was the worst thing I could have done, but at the time, I still didn't understand everything that was going on. In the beginning, I couldn't even get out of bed for more than just to eat or shower and go back to bed. I feel that my body shut down even worse because I ended up at my mom's house. Her emotional abuse while I lived there was horrendous, but I was too weak to leave. I feel those 2 years living with her traumatized me additionally on top of the trauma growing up. I don't feel ready to talk about what happened in a specific way. I was eventually diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. My CPTSD was just out of control at this point too. I would have endless crying fits and I felt like I was breaking down and going crazy. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety and panic disorder at the time, but I really feel CPTSD explains it all better. CPTSD is not in the DSM at this point, although it is in the DSM of the World Health Organization. So it's not something I can formally be diagnosed with. I have done lots of research, and the description of it deeply resonates with me. Once I was able to get on disability and have the financial means to leave her house, I did. At this point, my boyfriend, the one I was just talking about, broke up with me, saying that I just had too many issues, which is funny coming from him, but it was true. I was codependent on him, and plus my emotional issues were out of control. This is hard to admit, but when he tried to break up with me, I told him I couldn't handle it. I didn't threaten suicide or something. I just started crying, and he stuck around for almost another year. You know, sounds like you got some histrionic and borderline tendencies on your own here. Okay? Growing up the way you did, it would figure you would be manipulating the same way your mother is. Through emotional chaos. It's devastating to the other person. The emotional chaos that comes from this is devastating. At this point in my fucked up brain, I was thinking him leaving me was just more evidence of how worthless I was, because I had tried so hard to help him and fix his life and gave 130%, and he still wanted to break up with me because of the emotional chaos. It doesn't matter. He's seeing you trying to fix his life is more chaos. I spent the last year trying even harder to please him while he was at that point, not attached to me any longer, and one day he just disappeared. Unfortunately, him leaving and me having no sense of myself Unfortunately, him leaving and me having no sense of myself made me fall into massive abandonment anxiety and feelings of being isolated and alone. You have to understand, though. I mean, you got to look at your behavior. You're acting like your mother. And you basically, what you're saying is you basically threatened and guilted this guy into spending another year longer with you than he wanted to, until the point where he felt he just had to ghost and disappear. I mean, that sounds like, if he were to write in, what kind of story would he write? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Okay? Because I have a feeling if he wrote to me, I'd be telling him you're a borderline and you're manic and you're an emotional vampire. If he wrote to me. The fact that you're writing to me and admitting all this tells me you want to do that you're not. Tells me you have the tendencies, because look at what's raised you. See, the true borderline, the true narcissist doesn't even ask the question, would never admit to any of this. But I'm telling you, I'm trying to give you from his perspective how he's seeing it. I think you understand that. Thus, I was primed for the next relationship, which is my most recent one, and was with textbook NPD. At this point, I was at an all-time low, and I think I had finally gotten in touch with my real self deep down, and my real self was completely broken, so I was not doing well. I met him online, another red flag. He did all the love bombing. We had a long-distance relationship for a long time. He was from India, but living in Canada. So you go for an Asian guy, an Indian guy, which is both Asian. Well, why you notice this? You're going for, I mean, if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. But it seems like you're going for something so far removed from what you were and what you grew up in. Physically, what you can see, but personality-wise, you're just bringing in the same patterns over and over again. He would come visit me now and then. Eventually, I found out he was married and had been hiding that from me. But, according to him, don't worry, they were legally separated but still living together, which was true. They did get divorced. But I was at such a pathetically low place that I had to try to convince him and make sure he got divorced, because I wanted to be with him so badly, because he had made himself out to be the perfect man for me, gave me all this love, etc. And he did. And you probably also wanted to see things that weren't there. You're desperate for love. You're desperate for it. So when you're desperate for love because of narcissistic abuse, you'll see things that aren't there about people. After that, he moved to my town and we lived together, and it did not go well. He had several ex-girlfriends who I guess he had been seeing in the past while married, that he was texting all the time, and I couldn't take it. Well, that means he's cheating on you. But I also had a really hard time letting go. It took my therapist saying straight up to my face, he's emotionally abusing you, for me to get the jolt of motivation to try to get rid of him. That, and I found evidence that he was talking to several women online, and he had physically cheated on me. Of course, he had physically. You're not texting several women and not trying to hook up with them. You're just not. This is what I'm trying to tell you. You're seeing things that aren't there, or you're not seeing things that are right in front of your face. Not only do you not see the red flags, you see things. You make up things that aren't there, and you don't see what's right in front of your face. Yet it still took me several months before I could fully break off with him. Once I did, I broke it off, and I have not talked to him since. Side note, notice I tend to date outside my race culture. Yeah, I tend to be attracted to other races. I think I might be afraid of white men. Maybe it has something to do with my dad and brothers. Well, I'm glad you came to that realization yeah. And because you're stuck physically, what you're seeing, you're not looking at who these people really are. This is what, it's a stupid saying, but there's more to the person than what they look like. This was a massive turning point for me where I figured out what narcissism is, and I figured out that my mom was a narcissist, and all the pieces started falling together. And I realized all the stuff I had been suffering from growing up was trauma. It's been almost 3 years, and I've actively been trying to heal since then, and I have not been in another relationship. I'm beginning to understand and get in touch with my real self. The one area I massively struggle with is relationships. It's how abuse feels like love, and real love scares me because I've never had it. I believe I'm addicted to being abused. You're like going through the UN of narcissistic abuse. I mean, that's basically what you're trying to do here. It's like the United Nations. Let's date a narcissist from every country, huh? Start focusing on the behavior and stop focusing on what these guys look like. And you're not even looking at them as whether they're good looking or not. Like I said, I don't know if I was the golden child. I don't know if I was the golden child or the scapegoat or what. I don't know what my father was or my brothers. I'm pretty sure I have daddy issues. You think? Just not from my dad, but my brothers, who were significantly older than me, and although they were sometimes caring on the surface, I always felt that mom had them brainwashed to believe I was a problem child. I was dirty, sinful, because I didn't buy into the religious rhetoric. Like I mentioned in the other video, they are also highly religious, acting out of my parents' religious wet dream, which is, one is a missionary, one is a pastor. I feel like I was never protected, and my dad threw me to my mom as a way to deal with her. Right, you were your mother's toy, because your mother's just a giant child herself. Your father did this. Your father threw you to your mother to be her toy. I think I craved to have someone stand up to her on my behalf and to feel protected. I'm looking or thinking in mind that I want a man who will finally protect me. Yet all I seem to do all the time is run into assholes. That just reopened that wound all over and over again. I don't understand how to have a relationship. I can't tell if it's because I'm just too messed up to be in a relationship, or if my I'm messed up excuse to avoid intimacy intimacy because it scares me. I am old. I am just old. I feel like I'm an 80-year-old in a 34-year-old woman's body. I've seen most of what I want to see in this world. I deal with chronic fatigue and constant onslaught of flashbacks. I go into flashbacks and just lay there and physically shake. I spent my life being my mom's mom. I feel like I don't know. I guess that I can earn some of my mom's love or God's love. That maybe I'll be good enough someday. If someone can grace me with a peaceful life and the rest of my life, that's all I want. No one's going to love you till you love yourself. Maybe this story wasn't specific enough, and I'm sure I left out some important examples of abuse that are repressed. When I have the time, I may write something that is better if need be. But honestly, even if my story doesn't work very well to be analyzed, I'm happy to have it on here because it's validating to have my story told. Anonymous. Nobody's going to love you, Anonymous, until you love yourself. And you're not going to be able to love yourself until you cut this toxicity out of your life once and for all, completely. You will never get to know yourself with the narcissist in your life. Never. The reason you feel old is because you were grown up. You had to be an adult as a child. You had a mother, your own mother, and you're exhausted from it. None of this changes. None of this. You will never love yourself or find anybody to love you the way you want until you cut this toxicity out of your life. Period. So I hope that helps. Thank you for another contribution and story. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been the Narcissistic Resistance.